Let's go ahead and get started. I don't think I did that right. Nope. There we go. So we'll continue talking about the parasites today, and we're on schedule actually. Where do I have? There it is. So I believe I talked about Trypanosami cruzi, and so there's nothing further I want to talk about that. Trypanosami cruzi is a parasite that causes Chagas disease, a disease found in Latin America, and recently has crossed into Texas. Any question about any of that? So I want to talk about Trypanosoma brucei, or brucei, which is a disease similar to Trypanosoma cruzi. I shouldn't say a disease, it's a parasite that's similar. The difference is that this one is found in Africa and causes African sleeping sickness. The vector which transmits the disease to humans is the tsetse fly. Also can be pronounced tsetse fly or tsetse fly. And the disease ranges wherever you can find the vector, meaning the tsetse fly. Any questions about that? So all I want to say about Trypanosoma brucei is that it has a similar life cycle to Chagas disease. The difference is that the patients, when they have African sleeping sickness, the parasite lives in the human, and when the parasite is in the human, it gets into the neural cells, and especially the brain, and causes the patient to sleep. And then the end is the patient literally sleeps to death. Any questions about that? All right. The other flagellate I want to talk about is leishmania. And leishmania is found in most places in the tropics and the subtropics. It is a parasite that's commonly hosted by dogs, wild dogs, and rodents. And it too is transmitted to humans by a vector. And the vector that spreads leishmania to humans are an insect called sandflies. Any questions about that? There are 21 species of leishmania that can infect humans. And all of these 21 species are transmitted by 2 genera of sandflies. There are 3 clinical forms when a patient gets leishmania, meaning that when the patient is bitten by a sandfly, which transmits leishmania. First, at the bite site, you can get a large painless skin ulcer at the sandfly bite. And it'll look like this. This looks like this patient got bitten twice, once here and then once on the ear. And it'll be a large scaly area where the parasite is actively reproducing. So it'll be an ulcer, and the trouble is that that wound can be infected with bacteria. But usually the wounds will on their own heal with time, although they will leave scars on the individual. Once the patient throws off the parasite, the patient then will have lifelong immunity, at least to the parasites, or meaning at least to Leishmania in that region of the world. There's arguments among the specialists, but it appears that Leishmania in Latin America and Leishmania in the Middle East are different enough that when you have immunity to one, you can get Leishmania in the other part of the world. And if you think about it, that's not so surprising. Anyways, if you get Leishmania and you throw it off, you will be immune to Leishmania, at least in that part of the world. All right? The second clinical form is where the ulcer expands from the bite mark, and then it includes a mucous membrane. And the mucous membranes are usually the mouth or the nose. And if the Leishmania infects a mucous membrane, the damage will be severe. And most patients will heal, but they are disfigured. And where the heck do I have a picture of that? Just a minute. I've got a picture of that someplace. Ah, that's the wrong one. Let's see if it's here. Ah, here it is. So this child has Leishmania. Let me move that over here. And you see how it really expanded on his cheek and all the way over his nose. And this one, he must have been bit a second time someplace on the forehead. And it's expanding. It isn't including the eye yet, but it's almost including the eye. If it continues to expand, it'll include two mucous membranes, the nose and the eye. And if it includes the mucous membrane, this child is early in the infection, so it's actually not too bad of an infection at the moment, but it can disfigure the mucous membrane, as what happened in this patient here. He essentially doesn't have much of a nose left. Any questions about that? And the disfigurement will be severe and lifelong. Any questions about that? All right, so that's the second clinical form. It involves the skin ulcers that grow over a mucous membrane. The third is if a macrophage takes up the Leishmania, and then the Leishmania is growing in the macrophage, and then the macrophage carries the Leishmania to other parts of the body. And then you can have Leishmania disease more than just at the bite site. It can be wherever infected macrophages carry it to, leading to inflammation, fever, weight loss, anemia, and generally these symptoms increase in severity until the patient dies, about in 95% of untreated cases. Any questions about any of that? So usually Leishmania, if it's just stays localized, it will be a large wound, a skin ulcer, which will heal. And if that ulcer expands to the mucous membrane, there can be severe damage of the mucous membrane. But the patient in those two cases usually recovers, and then they'll develop immunity to Leishmania in that part of the world. Okay? And in case the infected macrophages spread it to other places in the body, nowadays there is treatment for Leishmania. And that boy we saw actually was receiving treatment. I think he was receiving treatment because his parents took him into the medical facilities for the U.S. Army. That was a picture of a boy from Iraq when Americans were in Iraq. I think we're still in Iraq, but at least we have a lot fewer people in Iraq now. All right, that was the last flagellate I wanted to talk about. So I talked about a number of flagellates. I talked about Giardia lamblia, although I only talked a little bit about that. Trypanosoma cruzi, and then Trypanosoma brucei, but I only talked about that in 2 sentences. And then lastly, leishmania. So there are a lot of important flagellates that I want you to know about. Fortunately, the next category of parasites we're going to talk about are the ciliates, and they move by cilia, and they're in the phyla, the Ciliophora. Let's see if this works. Oh, shoot. I can't believe any of these. None of these are working. Copy the link. Now, I got this to work earlier. Oh, that's a movie, so this isn't going to work because I don't have a program to make a movie work. I'm sorry. I thought I went through and tested this. I must have tested it on my other computer, and so on this computer I don't have any programs to make the movie work. Anyways, if you click this link, you'll see a ciliate moving because of its beating cilia. Any questions about any of that? There's only one cilia I want to talk about of medical importance, and that is balantinidium coli, the only medically important cilia to man. It causes dysentery, and remember that's diarrhea, but the dysentery that balantinidium coli causes is not as severe as Entamoeba histolytica. Mostly balantinidium coli lives in the lumen of the mucosa and doesn't cause much damage, but it can burrow into the mucosa and even burrow into the submucosa, doing damage to the large intestine. So in most adults, if the adult is healthy and they get infected by balantinidium coli, let me blow that up a little bit, the adult will be asymptomatic. And that's because the balantinidium coli is staying in the lumen and eating food in the lumen. And that really won't damage you because what that food is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The same as Entamoeba histolytica, the cyst of balantinidium coli, or B. coli as it's easily said, is the infective form, meaning the cyst can survive the stomach acids, the trophozoites cannot, and then when the cyst gets into the intestines, it's a favorable environment for the parasite, and so the cyst will come out, its ex-cyst, and the trophozoite will start moving around, be metabolically active, and start reproducing. Fortunately, balantinidium coli is not that common in humans. It can occur, but it's more common in hogs, rodents, and other primates. And you know, I don't have where this one is found. I think it's mostly found in third world countries. Tetracycline is the drug of choice. Tetracycline normally kills bacteria, and it would not directly kill balantinidium coli. because balantinidium coli is a parasite of the kingdom Protista, meaning it's a eukaryotic cell, and tetracycline doesn't affect B. coli, at least directly. So why do you think tetracycline is the drug of choice? Why would we kill balantinidium coli by using tetracycline if tetracycline doesn't kill balantinidium coli, at least directly? Any guesses?
Your immune system can kill it off once it's weakened.
That's a good guess, but no, that's not correct. What the tetracycline is doing is it's killing off the bacteria in your gut. And that is what B. coli is eating. And so if there isn't enough bacteria in your gut, the B. coli starves, and then it dies, and then you lose the disease or the parasite. And that's why tetracycline is the drug of choice. It starves the B. coli. Okay? It's kind of weird when you think about it, because like I said, tetracycline doesn't directly harm balantinidium coli, but it kills off its food supply. And that's why balantinidium coli can be asymptomatic in a healthy adult. It's just living in your lumen, eating bacteria, and that bacteria, the loss of that bacteria is not a concern to you. Okay? It's only when the balantinidium coli burrows into your mucosa and submucosa, and then that can start an infection in the intestines. And that infection will be caused by another bacteria. Okay? All right, any questions about B. coli? If not, just a minute here, I have an itch on my nose. If not, let's talk about the sporozoans. And remember, this is the phyla, the apicomplexa. The sporozoans, they either don't move or they move like an eel, meaning they'll undulate like an eel. Malaria is the most important parasitic disease. So malaria is caused by a sporozoan, and it by far is the most important parasitic disease of humans. There are 4 sporozoans actually, that can cause malaria, and they're all in the Plasmodium genus. They include the species Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium malariae, Plasmodium ovale, and Plasmodium falciparum. Over 400 million people per year come down with malaria each year. 2 to 3 million people die each year from malaria. The people dying are frequently children. Malaria is endemic to the tropics and the subtropics, and it is found wherever its vector lives. The vector which spreads the Plasmodium parasite is mosquitoes of the genus Anopheles. So this parasite has 2 hosts and different life stages, many life stages that live in both hosts. And one host is the human, and the other is the vector, the Anopheles mosquito. And the Anopheles mosquito is the definitive host where the parasite, the malaria parasite, reaches final maturation and undergoes sexual reproduction. And then the mosquito bites the human, transmitting the juvenile form of the malaria parasite. And then the human has several stages of the life cycle of the parasite, and all of them are juvenile. So humans are an intermediate host. Any questions about that? Now, for those of you who are concerned, the Anopheles mosquito is actually found on the Gulf states and the southern Atlantic states of the United States. And so the malaria parasite can spread in those regions when somebody brings the malaria parasite to the United States. Generally speaking, I only remember one case where malaria was spreading in Louisiana. And I think what happened was somebody brought malaria to New Orleans, and then the Anopheles mosquito bit that patient and then spread the parasite to other people in New Orleans. Another Anopheles mosquito bit those patients and then spread it. And what they did to control the outbreak of malaria in the United States was they just fumigated. I think they fumigated the entire city of New Orleans. Okay? And then they brought the mosquito numbers under control and got rid of malaria in the United States. At the moment, there is no malaria in the United States, but because of global warming, the malaria is moving north of its current range, meaning the Anopheles mosquitoes are moving further north because of global warming. And the malaria parasite is coming closer to the United States. And there's fear that it will come back to the United States. And you notice how I said the term will come back. In the past, malaria was found in the United States because we had the vector for spreading it. And I used to have a map of that. Let me see if I can find that. Let me go here. See if I can find it. If I don't find it quickly, I won't show it to you. Let me get that out of the way. Ah! I need to make a map of that. I'll link to it so you guys can have that. I'm not finding it. I'll just tell you that it was found in all of the Gulf states and up the Mississippi for long distance. And yeah, I'm not finding it. Either I don't remember what the file is or I'm not finding it, and I'm sorry about that. Anyways, it was found in all of the southern states and the states along the southern Atlantic. I think it was found as far north as Washington, D.C. And how we got rid of the malaria parasite in the United States was people just started draining the swamps, and then they reduced the number of mosquitoes. And that got rid of malaria in the United States. What helped was, what was that? In World War II, they had DDT, and mosquitoes were very sensitive to DDT, and it got rid of the malaria, like in northern Mexico. But I think we got rid of the mosquitoes in the United States, which then got rid of malaria in the United States before the invention of DDT. And that was just in the early 1900s. You simply drained the swamps and it reduced the mosquito population, and so malaria stopped spreading in the United States. And that was a real success to get rid of malaria from the United States. Any question about any of that? All right, let's talk about the life cycle of the malaria parasite. I'm going to warn you that at each step along the way, the parasite takes on a different form and has a different name. I'm only going to ask you to know 3 names of the parasite. Okay, where's my picture for that? I thought I had a picture for the different steps. Anyways, the infected mosquito, which will have the mature parasite that undergoes sexual reproduction, and when it undergoes sexual reproduction, you then have the production of sporozoites in the mosquito. And the sporozoites will move to the salivary glands of the mosquito, and when the mosquito bites a human, they will produce parasites. Yeah, I don't have a picture to that either. I'll have to look at where I've got that picture. Let's go back to the original one. Anyways, the sporozoites will move from the salivary gland to the mosquito while they're biting a human, and the mosquito puts its juices into the blood to make the blood thinner, and when the mosquito does that, the parasite will be transferred into the blood of a human. Any question there? And that comes from the salivary glands of the mosquito. The blood will then carry the parasite to the liver, and then the liver cell will get infected from the parasite, and the parasite will undergo schizogony, and that's unusual for a eukaryotic cell to undergo this. What this is similar to bacteria, where the cell undergoes fission, binary fission. Well, that's very similar to the malaria parasite undergoing schizogony. And in the liver cell, there will be production of many parasites, meaning one will divide into 2, 2 will divide into 4, 4 into 8, 8 into 16, and then it depends on the species. Some of them at 16 will lyse the cell, but other species will divide once more into 32, and then they'll lyse the cell. And then these parasites will be released from the liver cell and re-enter circulation. And then the parasites will infect red blood cells. Let me see if that's it here. And then we're looking at 2 stages of infection, actually 3 stages. That would be one here, and one here. This is early on in the parasites infection of a red blood cell. This is a little bit later on in the parasite's infection of a red blood cell. And this is very late in the parasite's infection of a red blood cell. In fact, this one, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's at least 8 parasites living in this red blood cell, and I might not be able to see all of them, so that could be 16 parasites in that red blood cell. Anyways, the parasite can infect the blood cell, including red blood cells, although it doesn't have to be a red blood cell. The parasite, malaria parasite, can infect a white blood cell as well. And when the parasite infects red blood cells, you can see the strings. right there, or the ring, that's a ring right there. And that's just one of the two of the stages that the parasite goes through in the human. And there's a lot of stages. We're not going to go through it. And like I said, each stage has a name and a different stage of the parasitic life cycle. But eventually, the parasite becomes 16 or 32 and then bursts the red blood cell, releasing the parasite into the blood. Sometimes the parasite, when it's reproducing in a red blood cell, can form gametocytes. And so this is one stage you need to know. And usually what happens is with the red blood cell, the gametocytes will form, and then half of the gametocytes are male gametocytes, half are female gametocytes. Any question about that? And that's a little bit different sexual reproduction. We had normally one parasite which infected a cell, and then it goes through this stage, and then goes through that stage, and then eventually becomes that stage, and then half of these are male gametocytes and half are female gametocytes, and they all came from one parasite. That's just the way the parasite lives. Why I want you to know the gametocyte is that this is the stage of the parasite that is infective to a mosquito. And then the mosquito bites this human, which is infected with the malaria parasite. And if the human has gametocytes in their blood, the gametocytes infect the mosquito, and then this mosquito has the malaria parasite. The gametocytes then fuse, like a male and female gametocyte, fuse in the mosquito's intestine, and then that forms the ultimate last stage of the parasite, which is called the zygote. And then the zygote differentiates and reproduces by sexual reproduction. It's actually meiosis, forming the sporozoites. And then the sporozoites migrate from the gut of the mosquito to the salivary gland, so that when this mosquito then goes on to bite a human, they can infect the human with the sporozoites. So you need to know the sporozoite name, because that's the stage of the parasite that infects humans. You need to know the gametocytes, that name of the parasite, because that's the stage of the parasite in humans that infects a mosquito. And then you should know the ultimate stage of the parasite, which is a zygote, and that's the fully mature malaria parasite. Okay? Another reason why you should know a zygote is that this term is frequently used in biology. Actually, when you were first created, when the sperm fertilized your mother's egg, they call that first fertilized egg a zygote. So that term you should be familiar with anyways. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's only 2 additional terms I want you to know, but you need to know 3 of the names for the malaria parasite. Okay? Any question about that? All right. Now there's a few other things I need to talk about with the malaria parasite, and that is when red blood cells lyse, they release toxic compounds, and that causes the patient to be sick. The patient usually has chills, headache, and nausea, followed by a high fever. And I'm talking about a very high fever, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And that can last for several hours. And then the fever breaks and the patient gets a sweat. And that lysing of the red blood cells happens, depending on the species, every 48 to 72 hours. And another thing is the lysing of the red blood cells and the releasing of the parasite into the blood that happens when the mosquitoes are most active. So that would be dusk and dawn. When the mosquitoes are most active is when the patient has the parasite lysing their blood. And why does the parasite do that? Why does the parasite lyse the blood when the mosquitoes are most active?
That's when mosquitoes are most likely to bite you.
That's when mosquitoes are most likely to bite you and then become infected with the parasite. And so that's why the parasite does it. It's not a conscious decision, it's just evolution. The parasite lyses the blood when the mosquito is most likely to bite you. Malaria has a number of medical firsts. It was the first protozoan identified to cause a disease. So the first protozoan parasite ever shown to cause a disease was in 1880. You don't need to know the name. You don't even need to know the name of the doctor, Charles Louis Alphonse Laverne, and I'm not French, so I could be butchering his name. He was a French army doctor in Algeria, and he noticed that his malaria patients had something strange in their blood when he looked at the blood. And he correctly deduced that it was the malaria parasite that was in their blood that he was seeing. And so this was the first parasitic protozoan that was shown to cause a disease. Any question about that? And I've already mentioned that malaria was also the first disease that the West ever had a successful medical treatment for. And that is, the Jesuit missionaries noticed that the natives of Peru were eating the bark of the cinchona tree or the cinchona tree, you can pronounce that either way, which has quinine in the bark. And the natives successfully used that bark to cure their malaria. And so the Jesuit missionaries wrote about it and sent back the bark of this tree to Europe. And as I stated, this was in the 1600s, where the West had a successful drug for treating malaria. Okay? And quinine, which is the drug found in the bark of cinchona trees, is still the preferred drug of choice for treating malaria in the regions of the world where malaria is not resistant to quinine. Okay? Any questions about that? And the Chinese have also recently introduced an anti-malaria drug, meaning it was, I think, in the 1960s and 70s, the Chinese said, you know, we got to find a better drug for treating malaria. Let's read through the Chinese literature and find if we can ever find something. And they found artisan, a drug which was an anti-malaria drug used in ancient China. And for some reason, it was successful in treating malaria, but the ancient Chinese forgot about it. The country may have been, invaded or something, I don't know. Whoever discovered that it was successful in treating malaria, the Chinese forgot about it. And they didn't rediscover it for centuries later. Okay? And that's the second drug of choice for treating malaria. Any questions about that? All right, if not, let's talk about the last parasitic protozoan I want to talk about, Toxoplasma gondii. it's estimated that about 40% of Americans either have this parasite or have had it. The intermediate hosts, meaning species that can grow the intermediate parasite, are humans, mammals, and birds. So many other mammals, especially rodents. The definitive host is the domesticated kitty cats, and they can excrete up to 10 million parasites per day. So in cats, that's where the parasite reaches final maturation. And this parasite has to live in at least 2 hosts. It has to live in an intermediate host, and then to finish its life cycle, it has to live in the cats. Okay? The majority of people are actually asymptomatic. And I once looked up, I'm trying to remember, if 40% of Americans have this parasite, or have had it, it's much worse worldwide. I think it's something like 60 to maybe even 80% of the world are infected or were once infected with this parasite. And we can blame the cats for that parasite. The majority of people are asymptomatic. A few show symptoms of toxoplasmosis, where they have fever, fatigue, headache, and swollen lymph nodes, which can last for weeks. But the majority of them, the parasite just infects them, and then the immune system walls it off, and the parasite sort of becomes dormant until the person is eaten by a cat. Now, cats don't normally eat people, so I'm not even sure why humans are intermediates. I would say one time, long time ago, in our past, I would imagine that there were felines that ate humans, and that's why humans are an intermediate host. I'm not even certain if other species of cats are definitive hosts. I only know that the domesticated kitty cat is the definitive host. And then small mammals and birds can be eaten by a cat, and so then the intermediate host can be picked up by the cat, and then the intermediate host will find that it's in the definitive host, and it'll reach sexual maturation and the final maturation for the parasite, and then the parasite in the cat will undergo sexual reproduction, creating the eggs for the parasite, which are then found in the cat's feces, and then people and other animals can pick up those eggs of the parasite and then become infected. The parasite, Toxoplasma gondii, is causes serious disease in 2 human patients. It can cause serious disease in AIDS patients and in developing fetuses. So pregnant women should not be around a cat litter box. And I don't have this in here, but of American cats, if you have a cat that goes outside, about 85% of them have this parasite. If you have a cat that is totally indoors, something like about 50% of the cat has the parasite Toxoplasma gondii. So that means a lot of cats have this parasite. It's not well understood why indoor cats are so frequent with the parasite, but it's thought that they're getting it when they come into contact with another cat that has been outdoors, and an outdoor cat can harvest any of these. An indoor cat will rarely catch an animal like a mouse in the house, but that'll be rare. It's believed that a lot of cats get it from birth or from their mother cat. Okay? And that's why the cat have such a high rate for this parasite. If we wanted to get rid of the disease, we could just get rid of all cats and that would solve the problem. Any questions about that? I'm, of course, joking there, so don't be offended. But the cats are the definitive host. Okay? In the AIDS patients and in developing fetuses, the patients can get severe brain and eye damage from the toxoplasma. And the damage can be so severe that it can lead to death. Any questions there? Now that's only among AIDS patients or among developing fetuses. Other humans just get toxoplasmosis. Okay? One of the ways, and a major way, that humans come down with toxoplasma is by eating uncooked or undercooked meat, especially beef, meaning cows. I've got mammals in there, can harvest this parasite. And it's an intermediate, but the juvenile is living in the cow, or can be living in the cow. And then if you eat steak tartare or eat beef that is undercooked or raw, you can come down with the parasite. And apparently it's pretty common in beef because butchers have a high incidence of having Toxoplasma gondii. And apparently when the butchers are cutting the meat, they'll say, ooh, that looks really good, and they'll sample it. Or maybe when they're cutting the meat, they're handling the raw meat, and the cyst of the parasite can be on their hands, and then they eat without washing their hands. Whatever the case, butchers have a high case of having Toxoplasma. You can also get Toxoplasma parasite from when your cat visits your garden. And so when you eat your garden vegetables, if you don't cook them, you can get the parasite. And I was always a little bit worried about cats being in my neighborhood because I grew lettuce, and there's no way to get all of the cysts off the lettuce. Or from soil contaminated by cat feces, or contaminated food or water or hands. And some people get it by handling kitty litter boxes, and then they don't wash their hands, and then they eat. Okay? And that's probably why so many cases of Americans, like 40% of them, either have it or once had it. Prevention, the best way is to have good and proper hygiene. I'm having a hard time clicking on that. There we go. Good prevention. Okay? Any questions? Practice good hygiene, and then you'll prevent getting Toxoplasma. All right, any questions? If there's no questions, I think I will save the helmets for next time. We have to meet tomorrow and talk about the helmets, and I should be finished probably in an hour or less. We'll see. Okay?
Did you send out the last test?
Say again?
For the unknown project, did you send out the last test?
For the unknown project?
Yes.
I sent out results last night.
Oh, okay, I'll check. Thank you.
I haven't done it today, but I did it last night. Okay?
All right, thanks.
All right. All right, Ian, I'll see you later.